Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. Real treat for you today. One of my favorite publishers, as you all know, Ghost Machine. I have one of their super talented writers who made her comic book debut recently with it happened on Hyde Street Devour. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show for the first of hopefully many times, Maytal Zchut. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jace. This is awesome. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think we met for the first time at New York Comic Con, and the energy was great at the Ghost Machine panel and what have you. But your book had not come out yet, and then the second time we got a chance to chat at the Patton Oswalt Jordan Blum comic book block party, the book had come out, and the energy there was great as well. So let's start off there. Let's talk about kind of the reception, the fan community that's already been built around Devour and Ghost Machine as a whole. How's it been going? Have you been getting a good response? You feel like the community's excited for the books and they're showing up?
Absolutely. It has been honestly so incredible to just get everybody's feedback and get everybody this excited about the book. I honestly didn't know what to expect before it came out. I knew that people were excited in general over the fact that it was a new Ghost Machine book. And when I was at New York Comic Con, there was a lot of hype about it. I remember the panel and it made people want to buy the book. And people were telling me it was on their pull list. And we were just chatting with people. And that was so awesome. And it kind of built up hype that way. And the Ghost Machine brand in general helped like build that hype for the book. But then when it came out, the reception has just been incredible, like absolutely incredible. And our audience in general is just such a kind audience. Like we have fostered such an amazing community of fans, and I think that's to the credit both of the fans themselves, but also what we foster at Ghost Machine. You know, the kind of environment and the love we all have for each other. I think that translates to the fans, and they showed me love even before the book came out. So when the book came out, it was just that much more excitement. You know. And the reception in general, just to answer your question, like has been honestly incredible. Like I didn't know what to expect. And to get this much support, just it means the world to me, you know, and I want everybody to know that. I want the fans to know that it does mean a lot to me when I hear that they love the book, when I hear how excited they are over the book, when I hear that they connected with the material, it just warms my heart and it makes me feel like this all made sense and it was really had a purpose and it made a difference, you know?
Yeah, and it's so great too because at times, you know, people they want to be nice for the most part, and they say, "Hey, yeah, it's on my pull list. I'm gonna check it out. I can't wait. What have you?" But maybe they're just saying that, right? But then the book comes out right before Halloween. It sells out. Your first comic, you know, ever. It sells out. Everybody's second printing. If you missed it, second printing coming November 27th. Let your retailer know now to save you a copy because it's very likely it could sell out again. But yeah, that's just kind of proof of what you're saying that the fans really are excited. And kind of the proof is right there, right? It sold out. So what was your reaction when you got the news that it was going to second printing?
Honestly, I'm going to be totally honest here. I was shocked. I was shocked. I got the call. It was Mike, our VP, and a VP of publishing, and he called me up and he told me like, "Hey, I have great news. It's sold out." And I was like, "You're joking. Like you're kidding. Like there's no way it already sold out." And I was just ecstatic. Like for the rest of the day, I was just like, I mean, for the rest of till now, I'm still ecstatic about it. Like it just was an incredible feeling to know that like people wanted this book and they do want this book and they want to read this book. And I do think that I have to say that speaks to just the Ghost Machine brand, because up until now, we've released, you know, a lot of books that are already getting a great reception. And that built up hype for this book to come out, and Hyde Street coming out, like that kind of set it up that people were like, okay, this is a story in the Hyde Street universe. So I want to pick that up. And I think that really helped, having that Ghost Machine like name at my back, like that definitely made a difference when it comes to this book and it's selling out. And I do think though people saw it and they saw the sales and then they were like, wow, I guess, you know, we got to get more of this, which is exciting. It's really exciting.
Well, it's one of the things, and if you don't already know, you'll learn as you get more comic work under your belt. Like we as comic fans and readers, we put so much stock in word of mouth, and that's the thing about Ghost Machine. Everybody over there cares about the product. You guys are putting your best foot forward, so the word of mouth, hey, get Ghost Machine. But then specifically for your book, like I had a chance to read it a little ahead of time, and I'm telling everybody, hey, this book's coming out in a couple days. You need to pick it up. It's amazing. And I think with your background in television, so everybody, for those that don't know, Maytal's been in a ton of writer rooms for shows you've heard of, like Foundation and CW Stargirl and that sort of thing. But it's a different dynamic, right? Like because you don't really, yes, you can see critical reception for a television show, but it's not the same sort of feedback that you get when you write a comic. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Just in terms of the feedback, you mean? Like
Yeah,
just in terms
like
of what you're
part
seeing?
of, yeah, if you're part of the writers' room, it's not like people are going to come up to you and be like,
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
as opposed
It's
to
totally
yeah,
different.
yeah,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think because when you're part of a show, like sure, if people hear you're on the show, they're like, "Oh, that's really cool," but you're a small part of it. Not to say that you're not also a part of it in the comic book world, but like you play a bigger role, and it's your name on the book in addition to the artist and in addition to the colorist and the letterer. But your name is up top on the book. And that means that people are looking to you to say like, hey, this was good, or this was I wasn't a fan, or whatever it is. Like people are looking to you to give that feedback to. And that's just not the case in TV, because in TV, there's this entire like writer's room, and there's an entire crew, and there's an entire, like, there's so many people involved in television that it's not, necessarily like, even if you're involved in the show, it's not necessarily your name that's going out there.
right.
It's usually there's a showrunner, and it's the showrunner's name that's on the show, and it's all to their vision, really. So it's very different in terms of not only the process, but in terms of the reception and how people perceive it and how people perceive you as part of it. Because right now, everybody's coming to me and saying like, I love the writing, or I love the book, or whatever it is, or to Layla and saying, I love the art and all this stuff. And, that is definitely, not something you see if you're just part of a show.
Yeah, and the other part of this too is the fact that this again being your first work, but being with so many established creators. I mean, these are huge names over there at Ghost
Yeah.
Machine. So I'm sure as this was your first project, you're taking advantage of that, right? Like you're talking to Jeff, or you're talking to Pete, or you're maybe even talking to Jason about the way things might look visually. Obviously, Layla's been working in the industry for a while. So how beneficial was that to have all that experience to pull from when you were first laying everything out and kind of planning out the story?
First of all, I love that question because I always just want to rave about like my teammates. I love everybody who's part of this team. And I feel, to answer your question, that I had so much support. So much support in so many different ways, like not only the support of the company and the support of the team, but the support of individual people. And I learned so much from every conversation I have with every individual, whether it's an artist or a writer, or a colorist or a letterer. Like I learned so much from every conversation. And I know when we meet at the cons and we're all together, like that's the best opportunity in my mind to like talk to everybody and be like, what's your experience? Like, what did you learn from your time doing this? Or talking to, I still remember I had an amazing conversation with Brad Anderson about his process and coloring. And it was just taught me so much about the writing process that I just didn't think of necessarily. And that he thinks of from his point of view. And it taught me a lot about that. And so every single person on the team is so incredible. It's such an incredible creative and an artist in their own way and in their own parts of this industry. And, to get that feedback from them is so helpful in my process in general. And then in addition, I just feel like I have all these like mentors, I feel like I have all these people that are so established and that I get to learn from. And what a great way. I mean, like what an amazing way to learn to work in this industry, because you can't, like, if you're doing it on your own, like you'll learn, but I feel like this like supercharged my learning in a way that like I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I didn't learn from all of these incredible and established people. So I feel like I can't speak highly enough of them and how much they've done for me and how much they've helped me in this process. And I couldn't have done it without them. I couldn't have, you know?
Yeah, and on top of being super talented and experienced, they're all just great. They're just great people. I've known a lot of them for years, and they're just so nice and genuine. And I put you among that group, but we've only met a couple of times. But you know, you fit right in with that aesthetic. And the other thing that has struck me about you in our conversations that we've had in person is that you seem to be the kind of writer. You're always going to challenge yourself. You're never going to, you know, rest on your laurels. You're not going to go, well, my first comic sold out, I got this down. To go back and speak about that mentorship. It's not just that you've learned so much already. It's that you're going to continue to learn and continue to push yourself.
So true. And I think that's true for like everybody in the group, right? Like even the people that are the most established, like I've had these amazing conversations that have taught me so much about not just where I am, but where I will be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, you know, hearing from other people who have been in this industry forever, telling me that they still, you know, want to challenge themselves and push themselves and that they're still pushing themselves to new places. Like that's amazing to hear because I do believe that the learning process never ends and that you're never done learning. If you think you're done learning, like that's just not true. Like, you know, like you're hurting yourself if you say that because first of all, I know that I'm early on, so I know I have so much to learn, but yeah, you're right. I am going to keep challenging myself and I am going to keep pushing myself because that's the only way I can get better. And I feel that that's incredibly important. And that's kind of what I've done even in my TV, even on the TV side, when I was working in TV, it's like always pushing myself to work harder, to try harder, to challenge myself. And a challenge is so important. And this to me, like when I wrote this book, when I wrote Devour, it was such a challenge, but it was the best feeling in the world. Like it was so exciting to be writing this story that was so personal to me. And even the tough parts, even when it was a real challenge and I was like, oh, I don't know how to do this or how to do that because I just don't have that knowledge yet. It still was an incredible experience and so much fun to do. And it really filled my heart. It was like everything I wanted to do ever. Like I get to do it and tell my own stories. And that's like a really cool thing. And so, no, I don't think the learning process is ever done. And I want to keep learning and I'm always going to push myself. I have to. I mean, because how else are you going to also like keep making great material for your audience too? Like, I don't want to say like, oh, this sold out, so next book will be fine. People will get it. Like that's not a way to make great stuff for the people that are buying it. Like, I feel like I owe it to them and I owe it to the Ghost Machine team to always put my best foot forward.
Yeah, plus if you're just mailing it in, it's boring for you. You want to keep it fun for you, as well.
Yeah, that's also true.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's people out there in the audience going, well, okay, we'll talk about the book. So we'll get to the story in a second, everybody. But one other thing that I do want to say, because I completely agree with your philosophy about learning. And what I always say is, if I'm done learning, I'm done living. Like, what's the point? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk a little bit about the book. How polished is your elevator pitch? Let our audience know what it's about if they're not familiar.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think I'd like to think they read it already, right? If they're tuning into this, right? But just to give the version that I kind of always say is, basically there's this woman, Lily, who's preparing for her wedding and she's super stressed about fitting into her dress. All she wants is to fit into this dress. And her mom and her grandma are like super, super, super skinny, like not normal skinny. And they're trying to basically force her to kind of go on this diet or change herself and all these things. And the tie-in that we get to Hyde Street is this woman named Miss Goodbody who's pushing this product named Devour. And that's kind of how we tie it into the whole Hyde Street world for anybody who's read Hyde Street but has not read It Happened on Hyde Street Devour. So that's kind of how it all ties in. So that's just the short version, just a snippet to get you wanting to read it.
And it is, everybody, it's a horror story, but it's not a horror story that's got blood and guts and that sort of thing. It almost the scariest part is how real it is. Obviously I'm not a woman, but I have sisters, I have a mother, and I've just been alive in our society where, body shaming and that it's gotten better. Don't get me wrong, but we still have a long way to go. But you mentioned it being a personal story for you. And so I wonder about the challenges of kind of putting yourself out there, but also the feedback you've gotten from people that have been able to relate to it, immensely as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing. The reason this was so challenging in so many ways to write is because I don't think this is something like just the topic and the subject matter is something that I've fully like moved past. It's not like I'm like 10 years later and I'm like, oh, I'm writing about this thing that I dealt with once. It's like I'm actively dealing with all of this stress and this, not necessarily the exact story that Lily is going through, but the societal stress. And the way I put it is like, sure, Lily's preparing for her wedding, right? But there's always an event, right? There's always something.
Hmm.
There's always, oh, like I have to see these people. I'm going to like a reunion or whatever. Like it could be anything. Oh, in my case, it's like, oh, I'm going to New York Comic Con or whatever. Like my brother's getting married. It's like, there's always something that you have that you're like, oh, I gotta be skinnier for, like, and that's such a flawed way of thinking, and it's so difficult to have that always in the back of your mind, that voice always in the back of your mind. And I think like that is kind of like what the story I'd like to think captures is like there's always this pressure, right? Regardless of what that event is. And I would say that as much as again, I'd like to say like, oh, I've dealt with it, I'm done, I'm good. Like it's still present and societally it's still present, Societally it's very present. And so I can't say that this is something that even as I was writing it, I was like, I learned a lot about myself and about how I view this issue. And I learned a lot about the issues that I still have. And in terms of the reception, I think when people tell me like, oh, I get it, like I understood and I related and this really like I felt it. So I've even heard like too real, like, and I get that. And I also like it makes me feel seen in a way, like in the same way that I hope it makes the audience feel seen to know that they're not alone in this experience. It makes me feel seen when people say like, I really related to this because I'm like, oh, I'm still dealing with this, like, and I'm not alone in that. And I've spoken before about like, when I first pitched the idea to Layla or when we first talked about this idea, and she just understood it. She just got it. Like it already at that point, I was like, oh, like this is a story that I really want to tell and that we really want to tell because we're not alone. None of us are alone in that. And so like, even just that initial conversation before the book had even been close to coming out, it just like already I was like, oh, we all get this. Like, this isn't an isolated experience that I'm going through. And like, it's everybody. And I do think, yes, women, I do think, it comes from a point of view of a woman's story and my story. And like, that is definitely a huge part of it. But I honestly, not only do I think anybody can relate to it, but I found that a lot of people who are male readers honestly understand, whether it's to them or whether it's to their, what you said, like sisters or something else, like they can understand the experience because they go through it in their own way as well. So I've found that a lot of people have really connected to it and really understood what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from a top down, I mean, obviously this one has to do with body image, but if we're just talking about confidence here and doubting yourself, and that's the terrifying part. That's the thing that's so insidious. And Layla does such a fantastic job because I remember when I first got it and I'm reading it, and I knew what the concept was going to be ahead of time, and we meet this woman, and she's trying to fit into her wedding dress, and Layla did such a fantastic job. She looks fine. She looks normal. Yeah. She's attractive. She doesn't need to lose a single pound, but it's that, again, societal pressure or our own internal doubts of what we look like and everything, and I think that's almost where the most terrifying aspect comes in. But there is another aspect. There's, kind of a monstrous aspect to it as well. So finding that balance, was that a challenge? How much do we lean into kind of the monstrous aspect of it? How much of it is kind of in their heads? Was that something that you thought about, trying to strike that balance?
Well, I think at the core, like at its core, what this story is about is our own personal demons. Like, I think that at the very core of the story, we're talking about what is Lily feeling when she looks in the mirror. Like, and then it turns into like the monstrous aspect, because it's like, to what lengths do you go to
Right.
when you're feeling that way? Like, what would we all do in a society? Like, honestly, in my head, I'm like, I feel like a lot of people would go and take, like, we would be like, yeah, let's,
Let's do
Devour
it.
doesn't sound that bad. Like, and it's like, that's what's so scary about it in a way, is it's like, there is this monstrous element to it, but it is because it all stems from what we feel about ourselves, right? Because if that wasn't in the story, if the part where you're dealing with your own inner demons wasn't in the story, Devour doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't have, the monster doesn't do anything. It's a build up. And that's why it's more psychological, I think, than it is like horror, like, oh my God, stab, 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 like, it's not that, like, it's psychological. And it really, like, I've heard from people, like, it made me feel uncomfortable in the best way. And I'm like, yeah, like, I get that. It is uncomfortable. Like, the whole issue is uncomfortable, So,
Yeah,
so yeah.
and us being, like you said, our own demons, our own worst enemies is horrible. But building on that as well, there's the generational aspect that you added in, right? Because we see a grandmother, we see a mother, and the granddaughter, who's the one that's trying to fit in the wedding dress. But then even she has a child. And it's that thing, right? That part of us. Yes, we want our children to be happy, and we don't want them to go through the same struggles as us. But at the same time, you're perpetuating this. I mean, how many years has it been? Body shaming. Like I said, it's gotten better, but God, we still have such a long way to go. So was that generational aspect something right from the start that you had as a part of the story as well?
Not only was it right from the start, but when I started writing the story, I thought that was like, that was what it was about. Like, I thought, this is about generational trauma. This is about like familial pressure. This is about how it passes on from generation to generation, and you can't get rid of it, basically, because you keep perpetuating this problem. I thought that was really what this story was going to be solely about, basically. And then as I was writing it, and as I was talking about it, and as I was doing all this stuff and figuring it out, I was like, oh, like, that's, because it basically, I looked inward and I was like, oh, I'm the problem. It's me. Like, like, it's like, that was basically like what I looked at and realized, like, so it kind of changed and shifted. And that's when the story kind of morphed and took on a whole new life, because it really developed the story. It got deeper because I understood, like, what the real problem was, both in myself and in the societal pressure and in this generational trauma that you take on, right? Like, it's still accurate to a degree. Like, it's still true that a lot of us, face this pressure either externally from one person or another, whether it's generational or comes from society in general. Both can be true, but, like, at the end of the day, it's what we've taken on internally.
Yeah.
And that to me is such a bigger part of the story in the end of the day. But yeah, the generational stuff from the beginning, I was like, this is a story about a grandma, a mother, and a daughter. And like, I got it. Like, and then I kind of developed it from there. So yeah, that was always in the story.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, because it is built in almost, but it's almost like you said, it became personal and almost evolved into something even more than you initially imagined, and in a way a little more terrifying, right? Because it's
absolutely, yeah.
I'm the bad guy. I'm the one that sees myself like this. Again, congratulations, Maytal, on selling out. Reminder, everybody, November 27th for the second printing. If you missed it the first time around, highly recommend checking it out. Now, we can't get too spoilery. Your upcoming work that you have coming out for Ghost Machine, it is still in the kind of the Hyde Street universe. So, again, can't get too spoilery, but everybody, this is a panel from the Hyde Street first issue, and Miss Goodbody, we see her name there. And these are basically the entities on Hyde Street that are kind of harvesting souls. So let's approach it this way. With this kind of idea of all these different entities that are there sort of on Hyde Street harvesting souls and what have you, it seems like it's a very rich universe that you have a chance to possibly play in. So what can you say about the overall framework and what it allows you to do as a writer? Is it just sky's the limit? Any idea you can think of? And I'm sure you're working hard on those things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm already, so just to give some context, I'm already working on the next idea. And it does take place in the Hyde Street universe, and it's with the same creative team. So Layla will be are my artist on it, and I'm so excited to be working with her again. And I will say that it definitely is the kind of thing where I again like came up with this idea, and then I pitched it, and we were like, oh, let's go with this, so it is kind of the sky's the limit in that sense. Like if it's a good idea, we'll go with it, like we'll work on that, and we keep kind of working on those ideas. But yeah, it's another really personal story to me, in a very different way than Devours. It's not the same subject matter, and I think it is definitely a really cool universe to be working in, because when you put the horror lens on something, it kind of almost like you can make it that much like darker. It's like taking the same kind of topics that you maybe might talk about or whatever, have a conversation about, and then being like, oh, but this is bad. Like this is terrifying in its own way. And so to put the horror lens on it, it kind of gives you a new way to tell a story that otherwise might not be as effective almost, and so I think, for example, with Devour, it was the perfect way to tell the story. I couldn't imagine it happening in any other universe. So I think for my next story, I'm very excited to kind of tell it in this horror world and under the horror lens. But yeah, the sky is the limit.
So when you talk about that, about having that horror lens, are we really talking about ramping up the stakes or the consequences of decisions and people's actions and that sort of thing to heighten the drama from a storytelling perspective?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So when we take things and we focus them in a horror universe, it's about, okay, I could tell the same story, but if I didn't have, monsters or parasites or whatever, maybe the stakes aren't so high. But when you go with horror, you get to raise the stakes as high as you want.
No, I would say it's not necessarily about the stakes, right? Because like if you look at the stakes, even like in Devour, it's not necessarily about like the stakes that you have there. It's just that there's topics societally or like personally or whatever they may be. There's topics that are just like, you can tell them in different ways, but the horror lens is just like, it makes it like, it kind of makes it more pointed almost. Like this is
Okay, gotcha.
scary and we
Yeah.
should view it as scary. Like honestly, in Devour, I mean, think about it. Like this could have in a way been like a drama of a story, and it doesn't have all these elements that it does. But the horror lens is the perfect place to tell it, because this is a scary idea. Like this
Yeah.
is a scary thing that we are dealing with as a society and as people. We are dealing with this issue, and the horror lens is perfect for it because it is scary. That's kind of more of what I meant, like rather than the stakes being heightened or anything like that. It changes the stakes, and it also makes them, it makes it more psychological in a way, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like we're saying the quiet thing out loud by saying, "Hey, this is really scary." We're all living with it, right? We're all living with this idea
Yeah.
of body image and body dysmorphia and what have you. Many people are dealing with it, and you don't think about how terrible or how terrifying it is. But if you put the horror lens on it, then yeah, you can maybe have a little more empathy and a little more understanding, and to look at it through that lens of the generational aspect that you brought into the story as well, and realize, hey, maybe we could all do a better job with this because it is affecting people. It is traumatic.
Yeah, and it is scary.
Right.
Like it is horror, right? Like it's because that's the thing is if you tell it, you can tell a story through many different versions of a story, right? Like this is just my version of the story. But I felt that this horror lens is perfect because we should acknowledge that this is a horrific thing. Like, does that kind of make sense? Like,
Oh yeah.
it's not you can make it light, you can make it scary, you can make it whatever, but like by making it horror, you're kind of emphasizing that like we should be scared.
Yeah, and as we're talking about this, it's kind of the magic of the framework of Hyde Street that Jeff has come up with, right? Because now I want to read your next thing even more, because what idea is this going to be that we're going to take a look at the horror lens, and to your point, make it more pointed, and kind of say again the quiet part out loud to realize, hey, here's this other terrible thing that's happening. And maybe we can relate to it personally, maybe not. But it makes for an exciting story, and we all get the chance to start a conversation as well, which is what I think the best sort of fiction and stories do. Right? They start conversations that sometimes are not that comfortable to have.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I love that this has kind of started a conversation in a way because I want to say that my intention with it was a commentary. Like, it wasn't necessarily like this is going to affect people in one way or another. It was a commentary. But the hope is definitely always that like people will read it and feel seen and feel understood and feel like, maybe be a little more compassionate towards themselves because they're not alone and because this is something that a lot of people are dealing with. So I think like although it is a commentary, it definitely has had a positive effect. And I love that. Like that definitely is an impact that I really appreciate that I've been able to have, even if it's in a small way, like even if it's one person saying, I feel seen.
Yeah, it's incredibly important, and it goes to something I say all the time, which is you can tell what a society cares about by looking at the stories that the fictional stories that they make up. And I that's one of the reasons I love comics so much. So anyway, again, Maytal, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Congratulations again on selling out your debut comic. That's just amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really just an incredible experience, and I am along for the ride, and I'm excited to see what's next.
Well, if anybody wants to follow along on social media, follow your work, so they know when new things are coming out and what have you, where's the best place? Are you active somewhere?
So I would say, first of all, follow Ghost Machine Pro on Instagram. Always follow Ghost Machine Pro on Instagram if you don't already, which you probably do. But if you want to follow me personally, which I'll post about my stories and everything that I'm doing, it's MZCHUT on Instagram. It's at MZCHUT. So M and then my last name.
Great, and I'll put a link to both the Ghost Machine Pro and Maytal's Instagram in the show notes, everybody. So if you're having trouble finding them, just go and click there. So again, thanks so much for joining me. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And Maytal and I both want to express our appreciation for everybody joining us as well. We appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk to you next time.